Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the UNE Town Hall, Union Siblings. I'm joined here by the Executive National Vice President, Haley Millington.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome.
I am Alicia Kong, the President of the Union of National Employees. I want to remind everyone that if you have your phones on, now would be a good time to put them on vibrate so that we can make sure that we don't have any interruptions this evening. Avant de commencer, je tiens à vous...
Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that our respectful behavior policy is always in effect at any UNE event. This should be a respectful place for dialogue. And so we're asking everyone to take part and to show kindness. No form of harassment or discrimination, no aggressive behavior of any kind or language will be accepted.
Here, and the ones that were sent in advance. Due to technical reasons, we can't take any of the ones from the audience online. If we have time at the end and our technical support can, we will have those read out in the room at the end of the session today. We're going to be here 90 minutes together, and I hope that this is a good 90 minutes where we can have some important dialogue this evening. Haley?
Good evening, everyone. And of course, thank you for being here this evening. Alicia has already introduced me, but I don't mind reintroducing myself. My name is Haley Millington, and I am your current National Executive Vice President. We're here at this town hall today, and we're really hoping that this is a space where you can feel comfortable to raise your concerns, share your ideas, and we're hoping you can get the answers that you're looking for this evening. We know that many of you have been recently affected by the developments over the past couple days, and we want you to know that we hear you. Tonight is about transparency, accountability, and making sure not only are your voices heard, but we have a plan to move forward to act upon what we're hearing. Whether you are in this room or joining us online tonight, your participation is valued. For some reason, I guess my fingers aren't working, right? So let's make this a respectful and productive conversation. I'd just like to give you a little reminder that for any UNE event, the anti-harassment policy is always in effect. To be clear, when we respond that privacy and confidentiality restricts us from answering the way in which maybe you would like us to answer, it is because privacy and confidentiality means we cannot provide specifics in terms of names, dates, instances, as that would possibly reveal the identity of parties and detail of events. So again, thanks to each of you, those online and here in person, for joining us.
Thanks for that, Haley. And I think it's worthwhile to start with a bit of an update on the staffing at the Union of National Employees. As most of you know, in the bylaws and in the policies, staffing falls to the national president, but there are several bylaws and policies that dictate how staffing occurs within the organization, including the collective agreement of the staff that we've hired at UNE. So I'm going to give a bit of a preamble, and then I'm going to get into some details. So let's start with the fact that obviously there's been a lot of changes happening at the office. We've had several staff on leave, and we've also had several staff departures. And through those departures, we launched a hiring process. And the way that hiring processes work is that first, we must open up the competition to all of the staff internal to the UNE. And that's part of the staff collective agreement. The second phase is to open it up to other members of the same union as our staff. That is the second part. The third part is we can open it up to staff, to members of the Union of National Employees, which are rank and file members across the country. And lastly, we can open it up to members of the public at large. Now, those processes can take place simultaneously, but they do require that a vice president sit on the board as well, and there are several key criteria that must be met throughout the process. And I'm going to be very frank with you. We have not had an inundation of candidates with the criterias that we're looking for apply for the positions. And so that means that we continue to keep those positions open and look for candidates that meet the requirements that we're looking for. So that is the process for hiring and some of the details around hiring. Haley and I have taken part in processes most of the spring. We do have at least one individual that's accepted the job in the National Labor Relations positions. We have another offer out to another person that we're waiting to hear back from. And we have several positions right now posted online. We have the National Finance Officer that's posted. We have the NLRO positions open to fill any of the remaining vacancies. And we've also have internal processes that are being done simultaneously as these are going on. And so obviously staffing is one of the main activities that I'm spending my time doing and taking part of, but Haley has also taken part of some of the staffing processes. Now I'm gonna move on a little bit to talk about the organization a bit broader. So here are things are gonna kind of unfold. We'll be answering 2 questions from those that have been submitted in advance and a question from the floor in the room if there are questions, or we'll go back to the ones that were sent in advance or any of the ones that the technicians in here can support us with from those in the chat. The questions were categorized in 5 different areas: youth activism, accountability, vision, training, and bargaining. Representation, there was a presentation town hall on May 28th, and this was specifically to address obviously some questions around the 800 cuts that happened in the passport team for term individuals. And we were going to be holding another conversation on that on next Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. to answer additional questions. So we are on top of what's happening with the employers and continuing to keep individual employees or members apprised of the situations within their employer groups. So I want to just do a couple of clarifications. An early termination of a term is not workforce adjustment, which is known as WFA. At any time, the employer can shorten a term with 30 days notice from a contract where they have a term contract with a member. That does not mean that we don't look at ways to continue to support those members. They are unionized members. And if we are suspicious that there are specific reasons as to why these terms were terminated and not others, we still continue to hold them accountable for the collective agreement that we have signed with the employer. But I want to make sure that we're not talking about layoffs of indeterminate employees, but determined employees, which means they have a term end date to their employment. So, Haley, do you want to kind of walk us through the finance side?
So I'll just let those in the room and online know that UNE is currently undergoing an audit. We have changed audit firms, which has added to the delay. We've had retirements in the finance section, and of course, people are on leave. So we hope to be more operational by the end of June. The expenditures that come about, they are taken to the National Executive, and they're advised of any expenditures that happen during the time prior to any National Executive meeting. So that's it in a brief nutshell on what's happening with regards to finance.
Thank you for that, Haley. And I will, I much appreciate that. I think we're now in the Q&A session. Would you like to start with the first question that we have up on the board?
How is Okay. How is UNE addressing the evolving needs of members in the current public service environment?
Well, one of the ways in which we're continuing to address the needs of members is obviously talking to members and finding out exactly what's going on in the workplace. One of the reasons that we've continued to do the town halls is to let members know that we are available and do want to know what's happening. So in the Passport town hall that we held, we were made aware of many of the challenges that members are facing, but specifically to their workplaces. And by knowing those things, that gives me the ammunition I need to go back to the employer or to hold the employer accountable in the media or through lobbying. And so for us, it's very important that members keep us informed. And some of the ways that we're able to hold the employer accountable is ensuring that they're following the collective agreement. Obviously, from our perspective, the collective agreement is one of the most important documents that we have with the employer at any given time. And the section that outlines what WFA is, workforce adjustment, dictates in which methodology they need to notify members of layoffs and who goes through layoff first. So oftentimes what you see is, and I think we saw this in the fall, Haley, and into the spring, was that the 3-year rollover stopped. And that's to give the employer, from their perspective, some flexibility, because if those individuals roll over into indeterminate positions, the process for layoffs is much more complex. We have to set up committees with the employer, and then we have to go through an exercise together where we have representatives from both the employer and the union to walk through the workforce adjustments. And usually what you're looking at is an envelope with service deliveries that the actual department is trying to reach. And so we are constantly in communication with our sister unions. For example, with Passport, we're talking to CEIU about what they're hearing, but also just last week I was talking with the president of the PSAC regarding the campaign that they have to talk about the very important services that many of our members deliver to Canadians. I think that there's often a misrepresentation of the work that our members do and an unfair picture of what public service workers really do for Canadians.
Correct.
And so we're constantly in communication to make sure that we have consistent media lines. I spent most of the weekend this weekend and early this week doing media interviews about the cuts at Passport and talking about the impact this is going to have on Canadians' ability to get passports. But not only that, I mean, obviously, they're going from being paid by federal tax dollars to provincial tax dollars because once they've been terminated, they're going to end up on unemployment, which means they're still going to be using up tax dollars, and now they're not providing those very vital services to Canadians. And from that perspective, we're constantly evolving the messages as we become aware of what's happening. Obviously, Carney campaigned on caps and not cuts, and that is not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is cuts and not caps. And so we're going to continue to lobby all levels of government to make sure that they understand what these cuts mean. Because I'll tell you, when I went to Passport, for those who don't know, I got married last year and I had to change my name to my married name. And they don't even start counting that you're in a lineup until you actually reach the inside of the office, but you're lined up around the building. And so whatever they're reporting to individuals up the chain is not actually the picture of what our members are really living in the workplace. And it's our job to advocate and make sure that the employer and the government knows the reality of the members. And so that is really a role that both Haley and I take seriously through the committees that we sit on with the employer, but also through our networks and lobbying through the Canadian Labour Congress, through PSAC, and other unions that are actively working against these cuts. Was there anything you wanted to add on that, Haley?
Yes, I would like to add, when you talk about the current environment, I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the return to office issue. right?
Absolutely.
That is constantly being addressed at PSAC at the component level. At the component level, we're certainly following PSAC's lead. Many of you know that our collective agreements, we're actually starting bargaining at PSAC for PA, SV, TC, and a few other tables. It's being addressed at the bargaining conference for those of you who were able to attend. So, of course, this is a very hot button topic that is being discussed. That is our hope, that we will get some clearer language that can be included in the collective agreement. But of course, that has to happen during the bargaining process. So I think this is where we're really trying to be supportive, is to encourage members that if there is something that is happening, you need to submit a demand. Nothing will happen for us, our members, employees, unless it's in our collective agreement. That happens through you putting in a bargaining demand. That'll go to the bargaining conference that can be discussed between the employer and representatives of the union.
And I think this last round, when we saw that they eliminated the common table, it's even more important that you put demands forward, because Haley and I, as much as we would love to add in demands on your behalf, if we're not part of that bargaining unit, we can't just submit bargaining demands on your behalf. We really need to hear what the membership wants to be able to put them forward. Our role is really to advocate and empower you to move forward the bargaining demands. And I know that oftentimes the thing that we think about in good times is we want the pay increase, but the protections of your job, the protections of the layoffs are very important when we find ourselves in the downturn that happens. I mean, you and I were both there when the 212 downturns happened. And those protections, I would say, are equally as valuable in terms of how you're put out the door when they go through tough economic times as those increases to your salary. And they're worth fighting for.
I just wanted to quickly add that UNE was successful in having one Union of National Employees member at the PA table and one at the EB table. So UNE is at least represented at 2 of the bargaining tables as we speak.
And remember, we were able to get that extra one after on the PA table from the DCC Cappy Caddy group, because of the fact that we worked on an appendix and we pushed the PSAC to understand that some of our members are a smaller group within a larger table and they need some special attention during this round of bargaining. You know, oftentimes we think about the majority and what the majority needs, but then people get left behind. So one of the things that we worked on at the bargaining committee, the National Standing Bargaining Committee, was to put an appendix together to submit to the PSAC, and then they worked with us to get an additional person on the PA table to represent that very important group. But we couldn't have done that without those members actually pushing and advocating for themselves and having a voice at the PA table. So we now ended up with 2 people on the PA bargaining table, which I think is unprecedented in quite a number of rounds.
Quite a number of rounds since the 2018, when we signed our collective agreement during the height of the pandemic in 2020. That was the last time UNE had 2 members on a bargaining team at the same time. So this is a good thing for our membership.
And it means that we have a direct line to find out what's going on. Actually, did you notice on the elevator up that they're meeting in the very same building that we are today, which means they're in there fighting for all of you today for your collective bargaining demands, which is just beautiful to see. And I think we can move on to the next question.
What is currently happening for young workers with UNE?
Well, I would say that I'm seeing amazing things coming out of the young workers and their activism within the organization. I mean, just at the Parks bargaining table, we've seen a number of young workers make it to the bargaining table, which is wonderful. We have the National Standing Committee, which I'm hoping Eric Portois will be calling a meeting of soon to get the terms of reference moving. So I hope anybody who's interested will follow up with Eric about the committee. He's still the youngest member of the national executive at this time. He's not quite a young worker anymore. Don't tell him I said that. But he's there to support the young workers and the work that they want to do. And I think I'm seeing fantastic things coming out of the young workers. We have many of them participating in the PSAC Young Workers Committees in their region and nationally. We know that even just last round, we had Odisa, who was a young worker, who was a representative of the young workers from the Equity Conference. So we've seen a lot of the young workers doing fantastic work within our organization. I have to say I'm very proud of the work the young workers are doing. Yourself, Haley?
UNE held its first Young Workers Conference in April of last year. And I think since then, and the workshops that they underwent, and just the interaction that they were able to accomplish and really pivot themselves, whereby, as Alicia stated, we're seeing them not only active within UNE, but we're seeing them active within the PSAC, within their regions, and doing wonderful things. So I think that Young Workers Conference was a sort of springboard for them to really push themselves into their lives as activists, because oftentimes the people that you're seeing around the table are people who have been there for quite some time. And this has been a great opportunity for us to look at some succession planning, mentoring and sponsoring younger workers so that they will be able to take over at the table to be able to represent each and every one of you.
Thank you, Haley. I agree. I see them influencing and changing the organization in tremendous ways over the next couple of years. Do we have any questions from the room?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui.
Can you hear me? Yes, I have a question. Simon Equinier-Messier, I'm president of the local 70172. So earlier you said that you were moving forward with some hiring and you were working hard on hiring. I was wondering, well, I think there are a lot of grievances put forward. We have grievances that are at UNE-SEN. We haven't heard anything about them. And I was wondering if we could collaborate in some way, that if we could represent them at the last level and help them out, so that way it would unburden you as you're busy with hiring new LROs. We know that this led to particular situations where the employer is trying to reach out to you to set out dates, and we're told we have no feedback. And the members who are concerned, who lost their jobs, are also wondering what's happening. Some of them have been wondering for 20 days and haven't gotten a call back. So we're looking for solutions. Maybe your agents are in need of their executives to help them out so that they can focus on what's really important, representation. So I'm just throwing ideas out there to maybe to respond to the needs of our members. Thank you for your question. And what I would say is that the members of our team at UNE have a collective agreement. And if we had people who would work here who are not members under the collective agreement, we would have grievances filed because they're not hired by UNE. So this is one of the reasons why we couldn't just simply ask members to help us out to work on the grievances at the last level. And that's why we're not going forward with this solution. This is not part of our procedure. The other example you have given, well, are there any other solutions? Yes, we are an organization. We're asking the UNE and the Union of the Office Workers to help us out around the office. But yes, there will be a lot of changes in the ways that we are managing the representation aspect of things. So I will be making a presentation not next week, but the following week at the executive because we will be hiring administrative staff to manage the schedules of the LROs. Because what's happening right now is that the administrative work of our LROs represents 80% of their work, and only 20% of their time is spent on last level grievances. So we really need to change the way we work nationally. And oftentimes, you use the case where somebody lost their job, and what happens? Well, that grievance goes to the last level automatically, which means we have 20 days to file a grievance and also present it to the employer. And in these cases, what we're trying to do is table in writing the response to the employer, because if we don't have a decision that is in our favor, then that needs to go to the next level, and that is with the PSAC. So we're really trying to work on the temporary solutions in the meantime while we hire people. And as I said, the collective agreement gives us the marching orders and where we have leeway or not. And obviously, this is on our mind, of course. And I always tell everybody, if we want things to change, we need to make systemic changes in the organization. So Monday, I'm expecting that somebody new will be in the office, and they will be answering all the questions that are about, for example, overtime, so that those questions and those administrative things will be taken off the LRO's plate. So they will be able to look into the cases where there's documentation that they need to gather. So this is more administrative work. So we'll unburden them with the administrative work so that they can have time to represent members on the last level grievances. So this is really on our mind to make significant change so that the process is streamlined and is made in a timely fashion. So it's a matter of organization. At the first level and second level, these are members of locals who haven't always had the time to send all the documentation, all the emails that they've received from a member who filed in a grievance. So oftentimes, even when we want to represent somebody on the last level, we don't have all the documentation readily available. So we're trying to implement a new electronic system that will be available to locals so that they're able to upload the files automatically, and everything will be able to be fed to our website, and that will take away the administrative burden of LROs, because that takes 80% of the LRO's time. So what they're doing is that they're running around trying to gather documents, and these are among the changes that we're trying to implement. Thank you. That answers my question. It would be nice to have just a response saying, yes, I've gotten your message. Yes, I've received your message. We're working on it. So I think that would be really important, and that will leave us in a position where we're not so uncertain, because otherwise it creates a lot of instability and uncertainty. But what you have proposed is really on the right track and will make things work. But thank you for answering my question. Thanks. That really clears up the air.
Up in a nutshell. So I think we should move on to the next question.
Wonderful.
How is UNE planning on supporting the workforce adjustment that is coming, knowing that there has been a strong turnover of staff at the UNE office?
Well, I mean, from this perspective, I think that again, there may be a bit of confusion into who plays what role depending on what we're doing. And so, yes, oftentimes the labor relations officers are at meetings with the employer, but they are not the members. They're not the ones impacted by the changes that happen. This is why we have over 900 members assigned to different committees across our organization. They're really the first point of contact when any change is happening. The technical advisor that is there to technically advise the member. not the other way around. And oftentimes in these committees, what has happened is that the technical advisor has played an advocacy role in these positions, but that role is really to support the members who live the reality of the employer. And so oftentimes we'll give the example of parks, is that you have a pre-meeting with the locals, and then when you raise things to the employer, you're able to then say, well, these are the issues that have been raised at such and such a level, and now we need to raise them at a national level. And oftentimes the chain of communication, what's not happening is that when you're hearing things on the ground, it is not coming up to national. We're not getting emails that say, listen, such and such an employer was looking at a lean program, and they're trying to consult at the inappropriate level, and so this needs to be raised to a national level. And so I think from that perspective, they have an important role to advise the members on a technical level, but their role is really one of support. We are the members that live in these workplaces and decide and determine what kind of things are appropriate in the workplace. And so obviously our intent is to fill the positions as quickly as possible. But the other thing I'm going to say is that other than the cuts that we've been told about, we're not aware of any additional layoffs, because when we become aware, we actually send out a notification to the regional vice presidents in the region to let them know, and then they advise the locals of any information that they've been made aware of. And the process is 2 days in the collective agreement before any layoffs. They have to notify the alliance. That isn't even us, the component. They have to notify PSAC. Oftentimes they do include us in that notice, but they're not required to notify us. That's really built on relationships that we've been able to build with the employers, that they notify us. What we do is then pivot people in the organization to be able to put out a town hall like we did yesterday, or Q&As on our website, so that people have a place to ask questions, but they also know who to go to. So I would say that we're always prepared for these processes. We're always working with PSAC and their WFA team to know what is happening, what notices have been happening, and to be able to provide information to members that are part of that collective bargaining unit. So from that perspective, I would say that with the 900 members we have across but UNE proper, with all of the employer groups on the health and safety committees, the UMCCs, the LMCCs, the human rights committees, we are a network well prepared for this process. If anything, I think that with the networks that we have, we're in a better position than many others that have less critical mass.
Can we move on to the next question?
I guess this one's mine.
When will you hire new LROs, that's labor relation officers, who can meet our needs and the needs of the membership?
And again, I think we've talked about this. Because we're an organizing unit, the National Labor Relations officers are there to advise, but their main role is to do final level grievances, not first level and not second level. And I think that there has been a historic where they've spent a lot of energy and time preparing people for the first and second level of grievances. That is not the structure of UNE at this point. The structure of UNE was that each member should know their collective agreement, know how to fill out a grievance. This is how we've resourced the organization. I'm not saying that that's how it should be resourced. That's what I'm saying. That is the way we've resourced it. And that at the first level, the local shop steward is your technical advisor, not the National Labor Relations officers. And what we're seeing is that the National Labor Relations officers are spending a lot of time with people, preparing them to do presentations at the first and second level. That 80% of administration that they're doing and not doing final level is because they're doing a lot of prep with local shop stewards or presidents at the local level or the regional vice presidents to get them ready to do presentations, but they're not able to focus on doing the final level presentations. And so one of the things we've looked at is creating a position that's an intermediate, that is a national grievance specialist, so that those individuals can be directed to that individual to get some more technical advice, so that the National Labor Relations officers are really focused on the semi-judicial legal aspect of presenting at the final level. Because really, after the final level, if we don't get a deal or we don't come to some understanding or get a decision from the employer, it can be 3 to 7 years before an individual gets a decision on a grievance. And what we don't want to do is be factory producing grievances that are off in a big nebulous, and we don't know when we're going to hear from them. And so what we really want is those individuals to concentrate on getting the member a deal, or on getting the employer to see that they should be finding in favor of the member, and not sending it off to adjudication. And so we need them to really focus on that expertise that they've developed over the years. And so we're going to create these national grievance specialists to support the stewards and the regional teams to be able to fill out grievances. Because what we've seen, Haley, is that there needs to be more support for those individuals to feel comfortable and confident to do the presentations with the employer glaring at them at the other side of the table. But if the National Labor Relations are doing that, then we're not getting the level of attention we need at a final level grievance. And so this is definitely something we spent a lot of time looking at over the last 13 months of the mandate, to try to get our heads wrapped around what could solve some of these challenges that the members on the ground level are facing, while really solving the issues at the final level, so that we can get some good decisions, some precedent-setting decisions for our members.
Do we have any questions from the floor?
Absolutely.
Hello, this is Diego from Global Affairs 7044. So along the lines of the question that the brother here asked, I understand what you're saying, your vision makes perfect sense. Now, in the very short term, a challenge that we are encountering is that we try contacting the remaining LROs, and there is no response. So some of the grievances, we're missing deadlines. I have, for example, sent, without exaggeration, 7 or 8 emails to the 3 surviving LROs. I have left voicemails because the time period to appeal the decision was running out, or just the 25 days was coming to an end. So, and no response. So in the very short term, like next week, in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if we need timely or urgent assistance, how can we go about getting a response from someone? It doesn't have to be the LROs, but we need sometimes guidance. Thank you.
So I can say that Haley and I have intervened with the employer. Just last night, I intervened with one of the employers that was being very insistent on moving a grievance forward. They were more than happy once I sent an email to give an extension and move forward. So I would say my office, or Haley's office, has been able to put the weight of our names behind delaying the timeline, so that we can schedule an appropriate grievance that has been properly vetted and is ready for presentation. So I would absolutely invite members to send me an email, because the deputy ministers are more than happy to put off the final level hearing if we tell them that we're just going to file a secondary grievance because they are being unreasonable. So please feel free to reach out to my office if you haven't heard back. We will make sure that the deputy minister or the final level hearer, the person who hears the final level hearing, is willing to postpone the date to a date that we have prepared documentation. So please do not hesitate to contact my office to do that. As I said, we just did this last night in a situation where the employer was being unreasonable about the timelines. and they're going to have 2 grievances instead of 1. So they're more happy to postpone the one that we're trying to have heard and do it well than to have 2 grievances they have to hear, because there is a reasonability test, and we have been open to communicating with the employers that we are sort of in a crunch with a shorter amount of staff, like a shortened amount of staff with some staff on leave. And most of them have been reasonable. And when they are not, we call them out on it. So please feel free to do that. Haley?
I think you've covered it all. So what I would also recommend is that when you're sending your email, those grievances that you feel are at the final level, make sure that your email has that detail that we can follow up with our Director of Representation, so he'd be able to go into the database to see where they are in this process, right? So we need something to take back to him so he can go through and kind of check off, okay, so this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, and this is what we need to do, so we can put forth a plan to move forward. I also suggest as well, UNE does have a chain of command, right? So if you're at your local level and you're having some issues, UNE has regional teams within your regions that should be able to offer you support. So if you're trying to get a hold of national and you're having difficulties getting those responses, your regional team is another option for you to say, look, I've been trying to get this information, and they can advocate on your behalf to loop back to UNE National to get you the answers that you're looking for. Next question. Members and local leaders need more training on the collective agreement and the gray areas that are often subject to member questions. We are not experts on, so we do what we can to the best of our ability. What support can UNE offer to add to our capacity within our locals?
As you know, this is one of my so this one is one of the things that I think many members don't know, that we're an organizing union. And the idea that we've put the burden back on the individual member to be an expert in the collective agreement is only something I learned once I became a shop steward. I had no idea that I was expected to know my own collective agreement in and out and be able to write my own grievance and be able to go to the shop steward and say, here's my grievance, it's ready to go, can you please sign it and send it to the employer? I thought, I'm paying union dues, there's people out there who are not volunteers. I thought they must be paid people who I'm going to go to, and they're going to fill out this grievance with me, and they're going to explain the process to me, and they're going to prepare me for the actual grievance hearing, and I'm going to go in there prepped like I'm going to court, because we are talking about a semi-judicial system. And to my dismay, in 2021, when I filed my first grievance, having been a member of UNE since 2003, I was in shock that I was supposed to. I went through and reread my collective agreement, and I'm a negotiator. I negotiate the Constitution for land claims with Indigenous people. So I'm coming in with a legal background, reading, when is shall or will or, to the discretion of the employer. And I understand all those terminologies. I cannot imagine how the rank and file membership feels when they read through a collective agreement with the amount of pages that we have, and is expected to fill out their own grievance, go to the shop steward, ask for them to sign, go into a presentation, and be able to advocate for themselves after the TUBS course, which is provided for PSAC. When I started asking questions, Haley, as you recall, I told you, somebody said, that's PSAC's responsibility. We don't train people at UNE. And I thought, really? But we decided to be an organizing union, not the PSAC. Like, they didn't tell us to be an organizing union. Our members voted at the supreme ruling body to be a organizing union rather than a service model union, which would have people support people through the process. We decided to make it regionally based rather than employer based. And so in an area like Quebec, you have 23 collective agreements that you have to learn as a regional volunteer that you have to support people in. And so I think I would love to do more training, but we haven't set aside a budget for training. What we really need is the membership to go to triennial convention and say, we want to fund for training. We want to be able to be mentored through the process, and we want to be enabled and empowered to do the work that you're asking us to do. Because from my perspective, it's an investment. If I invest in each one of the members here to know how to represent themselves or to be executives, that can only benefit the organization. But if I say, well, I'm not going to invest in you guys, you got to learn your own stuff and it's all on your own time and you're doing it as volunteers, I don't know how anybody's going to do it unless they have a passion for it, and that's all they want to do with their spare time. And they don't have kids, and they don't have aging parents, and they don't have anything else in their lives. So I think this is a very important question, because I think it's really in the members' hands how the organization is structured. And since we're going through the structural review with UNED, this would be the time for people to say that what they need and how we're going to budget that forward. Because we're carrying surpluses and yet we don't feel supported through the processes. So, we're trying to do what we can at regional seminars, at conferences, but we can only scratch the surface of the work that we're doing when we're doing 1-hour sessions with people. And out of the individuals that have been to several of our conferences, many of them said they've heard what's been said, but they're not confident to go in and do these presentations like a lawyer would do with an opening argument, all the legalese that goes into why they should be finding, and a closing argument as to why the employer should find on their behalf.
Correct. So in the interim, what we've been doing, so when you have a local executive that has just come through an AGM, we try to connect them with their regional team, as well as giving them the necessary links because we can talk about what UNE can offer, but we're dealing with where we are right now. And what we have is the PSAC regions who are responsible for education. So we ensure that they're aware that there's that option for them to learn, but also PSAC has a little thing called it's a fund that actually trains the local executive. So it's a local executive development fund. So it's very specific. It's not for the wider membership, but it's for those on the local. So you can connect with that person from the PSAC region who will actually connect with that local executive, that body, and they will work with them and the national, as well as sometimes looping in the regional team, to ensure that they have the necessary training. And there's also a little program called the JLP, the Joint Learning Program, which if it is a part of your employer group, right? So if it's there in your employer, I know, let's say the group that I'm from, ESDC, we have the JLP. You can actually speak to your management team and get the JLP to come and go over your collective agreement with you, right? So we have been trying to utilize what is here for us right now, because everything else that Alicia has talked about, that's not in place at all. So we're left with having to use the resources that are currently at our disposal to utilize those.
And once we're back up to a full complement of NLROs, we were sending them in to do local training, lunch and learns. Prior to Christmas, several of the locals got training as well. But again, when we talked to the NLROs, they said it's a good 3 days of intensive training to get somebody to feel comfortable delivering a grievance hearing. And so, that's several lunch and learns over a period of time with a local that switches over every year to every second year, depending. And so it's really about where are people. The other thing I would say is network. There are people out there that are doing amazing staffing grievances that are not done by the National Labor Relations officers. You know, there are people that can mentor you who've done many grievance hearings. And I would say, you know, find the unofficial mentee or mentor in the organization to support you through going through this process. Because at this time, we don't have all the resources set aside for that. But I think it is important to find opportunities to learn where you can.
Correct, and to get the necessary steps or the necessary support that is required. So, for instance, there are some regions that lack capacity, possibly because they don't have a full contingent of volunteers. So usually if that comes before me, I will reach out to the other regions to see if there's support there and who's willing to call the member to walk them through, because that region in particular may not have the capacity. Because again, these positions are volunteer. They're being activists from the side of their desks, right? And that is a lot of work. So there have been occasions where we've not been able to have the capacity we would in any particular region. So being able to support one another despite any regional boundaries is what has really been assisting us to get through the challenges that come about.
Thanks for that, Haley, and I think we can move to the next question.
Can employers ask for medical certificates for sick leave and proof of family obligation from employees that receive their letter of termination?
Well, the shorter answer is yes, they can. And the longer answer is what is provided is dependent on the individual case and the situation. Obviously, if you're trying to get sick leave paid, it may require a certificate depending on the collective agreement that you have. Some of them require 3 days of sick leave taken for a medical certificate, and some require longer depending on who your employer group is. And even after you're terminated, sometimes what employers can do is claw back the sick leave that was paid at the end when you're terminated from your severance package if you have not provided a sick leave note. We've seen that happen. Now, is that reasonable? Well, everything's up to grievance because it's a clause within the collective agreement. And I would say that, you know, doctors are definitely pushing back on people coming in for sick notes every time they have a cold. It is bogging up the medical system. And, you know, we're often sick for more than 3 days. I don't know if any of you were unfortunate like I was to have COVID during COVID, but obviously I was not off for only 3 days when I got COVID, as I'm somebody who suffers from asthma for many years. And, you know, I think it's unreasonable to ask somebody for a note, but can they ask? They can ask. Can we grieve it? We can absolutely grieve if it's reasonable or not. And the same with family obligations. Obviously, it's a prohibited ground under discrimination, which may be Section 19 or Section 17 of the collective agreement, depending on your employer, or other sections and other employer groups. But most things in the collective agreement are grievable, and I would always recommend that you follow up with your local shop steward or your regional team to determine if it would be wise to file a grievance. And remember that I know that many of our employees have 25 days to file a grievance, but we do have employer groups that have 4 days to file a grievance. And so be mindful of the time limits that you have, because if you don't file a grievance in a timely manner, it is often rejected due to untimeliness. And so I would say that oftentimes when you're filing a grievance, the most important thing is not if the language is perfect, because that can be expanded right up until the final level, but it's whether or not you filed the grievance in a timely manner. I mean, I don't know how many times Doug has told us that, but the most important thing is being timely, because the decision, one of the decisions that the arbitrators did was that you can expand the corrective actions and expand the scope of the grievance right up until the final level grievance. So that means the most important thing is to put the grievance in and not worry about perfection in the language of the grievance.
Any questions from the floor? Jeez. That's me. Go ahead.
That was her.
Hi. We know that the is fast moving with the integration of AI. Do you have any plans to use AI to streamline the work within locals and within the organization, within UNE? Are there any plans in the works to move forward with AI? I would love to, but it is a support for employees who are already at UNE, not in a way that it would replace a worker's work, but it could be a administrative aid, or it's something that could be useful for the first level, second level grievances. So I think that there is an advantage there. And if you're an analyst, you know that human intervention is still required. So it's not that AI will replace a worker. It really adds value to a worker's work. So we're currently following through with maybe some options that would be able to support locals and the regional teams. So to help you maybe complete some tasks, complete forms. But obviously all of this has to be carried out in consultance with our members. And it's really important to use the best tools out there to help our work. And one of the reasons why the employer is using AI on the grievance side is to help them win grievances against our members. And if we don't use the same tools, then we will fall behind technically. So I think AI is very important at the moment.
Can we move to the next question? What are the national leadership's objectives regarding workforce adjustment campaigns? I think when you're talking about the workforce adjustment campaigns, it's important that we know that we are working hand in hand with PSAC. Right? PSAC, I like to call PSAC the mothership, right? And it's important that we feed in to what they already have plans. We cannot be counterproductive to what is being required by the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Right, so we are working in conjunction with them. They do have committees where we have voice and vote to ensure that the decision is not just theirs, but that it is a collaborative effort that really reflects what the components are seeing and what PSAC is seeing at the head of the organization.
And I mean, we know about the campaign where they're specifically selecting individuals and the works that they're doing to serve Canadians through their public service work. I saw one of the posters had Birch Howard from Parks Canada, but I've seen several other ones that have our members featured and the very vital work that they do for Canadians featured to talk about the work that we do. I think we know that unfortunately the public perception of public service workers has been damaged because I always say we're the scapegoat. Like, we're always the scapegoat every time there's an economic problem, though we're the ones who are assisting, the development of economic initiatives or plans to the country, we often end up being the scapegoat of any government that says they want to cut down on expenditures, when without us, many of these programs go by the wayside. You know, we saw the cuts at wage and the impact to women and gender equality programs that were supporting women entrepreneurs. Those are all very important programs that I think deliver something to Canadians that would not exist in our society without these very important public service workers. And I think we're focusing on how important the work that each of you is doing for Canadians so that we can change some of the public perception, but also talk about, you know, the country population has exploded in terms of growth. You know, we went from 38 to 40 million people in a very short period of time, which means more people need services than ever before. And I think that, you know, from that perspective, we are uniquely positioned to help the government. And so we are constantly working with the PSAC to make sure that our members are featured in those very important works out there.
And just on a side note, before we go to the next question, Alicia mentioned public perception of government workers, but also it helps us to change employees' perception of their union, right? The last time WFA occurred in 2012, 2013, we certainly saw more of a rush towards activism, because it's really when our membership is in a bad place with the employer, that's when we see people looking to come to their union usually. So when you have campaigns that people are that's raising awareness, you see more questions being asked. After the last strike, at the last round of bargaining, we saw an influx of young activists that had been I guess their curiosity had been raised while they were walking the picket lines, right? So these are opportunities not just to change public's perception, but to also for us to change the perception of ourselves within the organization and within the workspaces. So can we have the next question? There is a complete lack of response from the labor relations officers to emails, phone calls, etc. My inquiries related to time-sensitive grievance matters. How should we get them to respond? My apologies.
And I think we kind of touched on that earlier, but obviously through the local, through the region, but at the end of the day, if you cannot reach somebody and there's something time sensitive, please follow up with myself or Haley so that we can ensure that these things are getting scheduled and put at the top of the priority. Obviously, we know that this transition time is difficult for everybody, specifically the members. You know, I empathize. I've been in the situation where I had a grievance going through, and so it is a stressful time for that griever, and we want them to know that they are supported. We are supporting them, and that if we need to interfere, we shall interfere with the employer on their behalf.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question as soon as I get the screen back up. Okay. So is it possible to get one other question from the floor?
Absolutely. We still have some time, and there may be questions in the chat that we could address as well.
Joanne?
Is it on? Good. Okay, so Joanne Fleming. I've just come on April 8th as a regional VP, second alternate, and I've come into some grievances that are already going on. So when you're talking about the third level grievance, what is the role of a local rep or someone like me with that grievance? Do we leave it to the labor relations officers to handle? Are we involved? Are we kept apprised of it? What's our role? Do we step back?
So third level grievances are usually handled at UNE. So it falls under the purview of the National Labor Relations Officer. Right? So again, historically speaking, that person from the regional team may have had a very close working relationship with the National Labor Relations Officer that is assigned to that portfolio. So it really depends on the relationships that are there. If you're looking to be kept in the loop on a grievance as a regional team member, you can also request that, right? So I'd like to know where this is in the process. But usually, once you've handed that off, you've handed that off. But again,
You for information would come to you.
so if the member is contacting you requesting information regarding their grievance, you're going to write to be it the director of labor relations or that labor relations officer that has that portfolio. You're going to say, I'm getting questions from the griever themselves. How would you like me to proceed moving forward? Because I think everybody has a particular work style. Some people may like the regional teams to respond on their behalf. Another labor relations officer might say, please provide them with my email. They can ask those questions directly to me. So I think it's important to connect and see how they'd like those responses to go forward.
Thank you.
And I mean, I want to add to the fact that, like, when my grievance went through, and this is 2021, went from first to second level, I heard, and then the final level grievance, suddenly I didn't hear anything for 3 years, and I got a random email, and it seemed random to me because I didn't know when to expect it, from PSAC saying, in 30 days your case will be heard. And I'm like, what? I am in shock. There was no update of where the case was. And I think that one of the things that Haley and I have done quite a bit of thinking around is, how do we let somebody know that their grievance is in the queue and it hasn't gone into the abyss? Is there a way that, somebody can look into a system that says from the regional area can say, yep, it's in the queue. The problem that we have is that we don't decide which cases get heard, the board does. And they have their own prioritizing exercise. So I can give you the example that in my case, it was heard within 3 years. But there are cases that I know of members that I worked on that still haven't been heard. And so it's not like we know that, like, it's a priority, like, once you're in and it's based on the date that you were submitted. The board has a 6,000 case backlog of grievances, which is why we want to solve the issue at the earliest opportunity. Waiting for it once it's gone to adjudication means that some people are waiting upwards of 7 years for a response, which, everybody's heard the famous quote, justice delayed is justice denied, right? Sometimes when we go back to the griever, they're like, what? That's still happening? And it feels to me like we haven't done what we were set out to do as a union. And so there has to be a way that we can do this in a more effective way that members feel like they're part of the process. Now, we might not have the time to get every NLRO to send follow-up emails, but could the system send your case was looked in on, it's in the queue, you should hear from somebody, something automatic in the background that keep people apprised that their case is there. Many of the emails that we get are just people following up. It's been 2 years. Is my case still in the queue? What's happening? I don't know. It's been 5 years. I thought my case disappeared. We're like, no, it's still in the queue. One of the things that we found out is that we have no influence on how the board decides which cases are heard. They have to determine the financial damages and the impact on the grievers. And we all feel impacted by our grievances. We're not grieving because we didn't think that this was a violation of our rights or that we weren't wronged in some way. But we don't, as the union, control how the board decides what's heard. And there are 2 different boards we're dealing with. And 3 and 4, because we're dealing with provincially legislated members and federally legislated and separate federally legislated boards. And so all of those have a different sorting mechanism as to when cases move forward. And so it does seem arbitrary to individuals when they don't know when their case is being heard or why the delay and the timelines and why they don't know where their case is falling in the system. And we want to improve that. It is one of the things that we are trying to tackle this mandate.
I think, too, it's important, Alicia talked about trying to tackle it. It can seem to be a bit of a gargantuan task, to be quite honest with you. Because if a member doesn't understand that we do not work in a silo, that we have to wait for these boards, that they have their own processes involved, then that becomes a difficult and challenging place to sit. So I think really what we're looking for members to become is a little bit more aware of when they have started a grievance, when it reaches a third level, what is involved. And then that way I think that will help that person's anxiety, right? Because they'll know, you know what, I know that it's not sitting in an abyss at UNE. I know it's with this group, and I know they have their own sorting mechanisms. So, you know, but I think it really does show that when our membership does not have a certain level of awareness with regards to either their collective agreement, their rights, what happens with a grievance, their responsibilities as a local executive, that's when a lot of challenges occur. But when you educate yourself and you gain a little bit of knowledge, it gives you that confidence that things are moving. And it gives you that confidence to be able to ask the necessary questions to provide you with that information that you require.
Yeah, and I definitely wasn't told when I was going through my own grievance process that there would be this delay. And I'm not faulting anybody. It's not like I looked at the steward and I'm like, why didn't you tell me that? They had no idea either, because we're organizing together, all trying to figure it out at the same time. And so really it's only through going through this process from step one to the end of a process did I really see the process for myself and understand the anxiety that this process causes, because you're still in the workplace. You're still dealing with some of the people that you may have had grievances with while this process is happening in the background. And there's, you know, when is the shoe going to drop kind of scare that's happening in the background. Will my grievance be found in my favor? Will there be a deal? You know, do I go to arbitration with them, or do I go forward and I want a decision by the arbitrator, or do I mediate? Like, all those questions are things that I think we need to get better at explaining to the members as a whole. And it is work that we've undertaken. I love Bonhams. So for those who don't know, I think it'd be great to have like these skits where like somebody's filing a grievance and, you know, you get this little video that's like maybe 30 seconds, but kind of explains the grievance process from beginning to end, that local stewards could just send to a member and say, okay, this is what's going to happen. And it's in French and English. And then at least they have some understanding of what's happening, because I was probably bothering everybody, asking every 2 weeks, saying, where's my grievance? What's happening? When am I going to hear? And I was a shop steward later, and then I knew more. And then when I became vice president, I knew more. But it's really where the bottlenecks are happening is those who have knowledge and those who do not have knowledge of the processes. And I think I want to demystify the whole grievance process for as many members as possible as we go through this. Are there any questions online that we can? Yeah, wonderful. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. There was a couple of questions here, and I don't have a touch screen. Hang on here. There was a question from Chris out in Jasper who was wondering when local rebates would be paid.
That's a great question. So I was talking to, actually we were talking to Sylvie today, who said that they should be out on Monday. And I think that's when they're going to be out. And then they're going to do them twice instead of once. But that's because we've now gained surge capacity in that team. We now have 4 members in that team now. So they can expect them on Monday.
Okay, this is a hot potato.
Ailey, this one's for you.
Very contentious. It's anonymous. And the person who wrote it is evidently very disgruntled. Here we go. Regional vice presidents have a full-time job, family, and stepped up to help members for greater good. removing all labor relation officers and not paying members' expenses, and they are incurring credit card interest. You are traveling while members are losing their job. How are you empowering and supporting members and their issues?
I would like to take the piece with regards to finance. So we're aware that we have not, again, Alicia has already mentioned that we are lacking capacity. And lacking capacity is not just a part of the regional teams, we're lacking capacity within the organization. That being said, we have taken certain steps, seeing that we can't get to the expense claims right now because now this is a moment of prioritization. So we have been providing advances to members. So let's say you're going to a conference or an event, you can actually write to UNE National and request an advance. Right, so there are mechanisms in place to assist these members if there are expenses and they're waiting for it. We've had discussions around ensuring to pay the interest on, so because we recognize and we know that as a non-profit organization, we are not supposed to cause any undue financial hardship. So we are trying to work with members if they come to us. We've had multiple discussions, or Alicia definitely has, at our human rights meetings, at any events, to advise the membership that should they require any assistance because they themselves are in that position, they then need to contact us so we can be able to provide them with an advance until we have the capacity of employees within that particular group to actually start working on the claims themselves.
Sorry, there were multiple points to that question, so if you don't mind.
Okay, so I'll read the whole question again. Regional vice presidents have a full-time job, family, and stepped up to help members for greater good. Removing all LROs and not paying members' expenses, and they are incurring credit card interest. You are traveling while members are losing their job. How are you empowering and supporting members and their issues? There is no particular indication if this was for the national president, national executive vice president, or both.
So, I mean, I'm going to address the removing NLROs. I did not remove any NLROs. That's not how this works. Our members are unionized employees. They have the right to take leave. They have the right to take jobs other places. They have the right to take promotions in other jobs. So I did not remove any NLROs from the organization. And in terms of travel, I would say that most of our membership is around the country, but also outside of Canada. And so if I'm going to meet with members to find out what the issues are, I definitely have to go speak to them and see their working conditions. One of the reasons that I understand the passport situation so well is actually because I went to the Montreal office to see what was happening at Service Canada and the processing center, and that makes me a better advocate for members. In terms of traveling, I'm more than happy to do all of the national executive meetings online, and they don't have to incur any travel costs or be out of pocket. If they would like to do that, if they feel that this is a hardship, then perhaps it would be a benefit not to travel to Ottawa to meet as a national executive, and they could stay home, not incur any travel costs, and we can definitely still do the business of the organization from a remote work situation. It is this thing that our members have been fighting for themselves, so I'm more than happy to meet with them that way. The other thing I would just say, lastly, is that I am so grateful for the time that they are taking to volunteer and be there. But when I give time, and I give a lot of time outside of the work that I do here, I do it because I've chosen to give time. And it is difficult, but it is something that I have dedicated myself to, is giving of my time for organizations that have a need for the expertise that I can bring. It's in kind time. And I think that, you know, there has been a situation in the union where, you know, during COVID, we pivoted, but we're returning right back to the same way that the employer has returned. Not understanding that there are many other ways to do business as an organization that can support members. There are times where it does matter that you're face-to-face with a member, but that is not always the case. In any situation that I can meet with members online, I take the opportunity. I have several meetings in the evenings with members on a continuous basis. I even mentor members. I have members that I meet with on a regular basis online, where I take an hour, where I spend time talking about, you know, different processes and how to become more actively involved. And I think when you choose to do volunteer work, there is a lot taken from you and your family. And you can only give what you can give. At the end of the day, if you're starting to resent the organization, perhaps we're asking too much of volunteers. And we need to consider that as an organization.
Heather, can you put out another question, please?
Okay, we just got a recent question. It's about bargaining and job security. It reads like this. It is understood that employees should have pushed more for job security. However, we have known since the Harper administration that they wanted to cut staffing in passport program. Why haven't we pushed for more job security policies to be implemented in the collective agreement these past years? Advising employees that this needs to be done. Make this a point in more town halls?
Well, you know how I feel about collective bargaining. I think it is the single most important thing we do as members of a union. Having been on my own collective bargaining team, I can tell you, prior to being on a bargaining team, I did not understand why they picked the things that they did to push forward and what decisions were made at 1 o'clock in the morning while they're trying to figure out, okay, the employer's trying to take this away from us, but we're really trying to keep this in the collective bargaining. I didn't know. But after being on my own bargaining team, I realized how important negotiation is. And I think that UNE in particular does a lot of amazing things. We do fantastic things. We are leaders in human rights. We're one of the few components with the human rights table. But I think that we've forgotten that the most important two things we do are bargaining and defending the collective agreement. At the end of the day, if we cannot do those two things with complete effectiveness, everything else we do is lost. It's because there will be no members to defend human rights for, because we won't have members in the workplace at the end of the day. And Haley loves to scream a good shame. I know she knows where I was going. But are we willing to go to strike for protections or only for raises? That's the question. Every time we were pushing the negotiator at my own table, it said, will your members go on strike for Appendix K, which is our appendix for SURLO, which is the selection of employees to stay or to be laid off. Are they willing to go? And I couldn't answer yes to that question. I knew they would go on strike for money, but I could not tell you that they would go on strike for keeping their job, because everybody thinks that it's somebody else's job that's going to be cut and not theirs. And I went through SURLO in 2012, and I was one of the spared people. But I'm going to tell you, when they said, come in Monday morning, you're going to find out if your job was picked or not, that Friday night, I spent the entire weekend preparing to hear that my job was one of the jobs cut and thinking about what I would do with the rest of my career, because I knew I hadn't fought hard enough for the protections. And I want us to get back to the kind of organization that puts the bargaining first, puts the strongest bargaining team of all of our members together to be on those bargaining teams, and is fiercely defending that collective agreement, so that the employer doesn't think, we'll see you in 3 years at an arbitration, because by then it'll be too late. that they know that when they violate our collective agreement, they're going to have to pay for violating our bargaining demands and the collective bargaining agreement?
This topic in itself is one that is very near and dear to my heart. First off, I'd like to know, for those in the room, who was around when we were fighting our sick leave? Correct. So a couple of years ago, our sick leave was foremost on our Treasury Board's mind. And when you, under the PSAC President, Robin Benson, membership came out in droves to protect their sick leave remaining as a part of the collective agreement. Because what the employer was looking for was to take it out of the collective agreement and put it into a memo of understanding, right? Anything outside of the collective agreement cannot be grieved. But let me tell you, Treasury Board membership was not about to have that. And they would come out in droves, and you would see a sea of red at every single PSAC event. Those employers, management that were in those offices looking down, they knew that the membership meant business. And at that, I can tell you, I was there. So I represented the PA table for the NCR in 2018-19, again, with the collective agreement being signed in 2020. So when those negotiators for Treasury Board came at us again with our sick leave being their number one thing on their list, and the PSAC negotiator saying, I don't know what you don't understand about no meaning no. We are not prepared, nor will we ever be prepared, to discuss sick leave and removing it from the collective agreement. Thank you very much. Punto final. That was it. Yet we have the return to office. You see, when we see a rally, you see a handful of people. A handful. And I know this issue means the world to the membership because the world has changed, right? The world of work has changed. Yet when the employer looks down from their offices and they see a handful of people, what does that say? Your union is only as strong as the membership. No one's asking you to take a picket sign and walk in front of Parliament Hill. But the fact that you know your collective agreement, that you're willing to come out for the pieces that mean something to you, and not just to you, but will benefit the membership, then they know we mean business. We are a collective. And if we're just working in silos and we're not coming out unless something happens and we've encountered an issue with the employer, it shows the employer that we're disjointed. So then we're vulnerable. Bargaining is the place where you can put your demands forward. And the membership is not putting in demands. As Alicia so rightly put, all they care about is their pay and what that looks like. As a member of the bargaining team, I had major issues with my supervisor at the time with regards to me going to the bargaining, to do bargaining work. But let me tell you, when bargaining was complete, he was the first call I was getting. Haley, when do you think we're going to get our money? What's happening with that? Because that's what people look at. They don't see the bigger picture. They're not understanding that work provisions, security provisions are important. Because one of the things I learned as a member of the bargaining team is if your team isn't strong, the employer can systematically remove everything that you have already fought for. If you don't have a team there and they're not showing that you're collectively strong, they will systematically remove everything that you have fought so strongly for. Thank you.
Heather?
La prochaine est en...
The next question is in French. It's from Jean-Michel. Hi, Alicia. Once that the reorganization of UNE will be advanced and full-fledged, and the staff will be there, the LROs will be there to represent our members and the organization and organize the locals. Do you have a plan or ideas to make UNE an attractive workplace for locals who are trying to that are organizing themselves and having them join UNE. Absolutely, Jean-Michel. And I'll tell you that it's not until we have a new structure. At the moment, we're talking with direct charter locals who are interested in joining us because of the advances and gains we have made on human rights. And I know that people perceive us as a agent of change within PSAC. And it's not all elements, all components that are agents of change. We are different from the others. We are unique. We are different, but we have to reinforce our base performance, our collective agreements, and the way to do it, the way we do last level grievances, first level and second level grievances, we have to make them differently, and we have to go back to the drawing board. And I do see a place for direct charter locals for them to join us. And I understand what they see with us, and they don't see the same thing with other components. It's not that that other components are not good. Other components are good as well, but we are a bit more special, and we are doing things just a bit differently than others. But thank you for your question, Jean-Michel.
End of our time together. We're at 7:29. We had 90 minutes, and so we are going to close out for this evening. I want to thank all of the union siblings who took the time to join us tonight. And I have to say that I always encourage fierce debate and questions. As long as they're respectful, we have to have the difficult discussions, or we're never going to get to the core of the issues and the fears that our members are facing. So always feel free to reach out and ask your questions. If there's something we didn't answer today, we may put it up in a question and answer on the website, but we're trying to do these on a monthly basis to keep the membership apprised of where we are, because we cannot return to the organization we were pre-trusteeship. We have to pivot the organization. We have to become stronger, and we have to be that leader that we were when we created the Human Rights Committee in everything that we do. And I think that we're well on our way to that. I know that there's growing pains and it's been difficult, but I can say that I think that what we're going to be left with is something a little bit more beautiful than we started with. Thank you. Haley?
I'd just like to take the opportunity to remind everyone who's in the room and online that UNE is also going through a structural review process. It is important that your voices are heard throughout this process, because the future and how UNE will look moving forward is going to rest on your shoulders. So make sure you check UNE's website when there's opportunities at regional events for Ed and Izan, who is representing Intersol, which is the organization that has taken on doing this consultancy piece with UNE. I think it's important that you make yourself present. And if you can't be, please look on the website for any information regarding the structural review. And again, let your voices be heard. Your union is only as strong as its membership. You know that saying, you can't complain if you've never been out to vote? Well, again, if your union is giving you an opportunity to have your voice heard, then why not take that opportunity? Thank you.